On my 75th birthday, my own son looked me dead in the eyes and said, "Time to buy a coffin." Those words didn't just cut. They shattered every piece of warmth I had left inside. And what happened that afternoon when the lawyer called changed everything forever. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. Every morning in my cramped little apartment on the Lower East Side, I wake up feeling like an old doll tossed aside. Neglected, dust-covered, forgotten. The smell of instant coffee mingles with the mustiness of old newspapers stacked on my rickety kitchen table. My hands shake as I pour the water, not from age, but from the weight of carrying everyone else's burdens for 75 long years. The radiator clanks its familiar morning song, a sound that once comforted me, but now feels like a countdown. Each clank echoes the days slipping away, the birthdays forgotten, the calls that never come. Through my cracked window, I watch the city wake up, young professionals clutching their expensive coffee cups, rushing to lives that matter, while I sit here in my faded blue housecoat, wondering if anyone would notice if I simply disappeared. That morning was supposed to be different. I had ironed my best dress the night before, the navy one with tiny flowers that my late husband David always loved. I set out the good china, the set we received as a wedding gift 53 years ago. I even bought a small birthday cake from the corner bakery, vanilla with pink roses, just like the ones David used to surprise me with. I expected my children's laughter to fill these thin walls. I imagined the sweet chaos of my granddaughter Emma's stories about school, the warmth of my daughter Sarah's embrace, even my son Michael's rare but treasured smile. Instead, I found myself sitting alone at a table set for 5, watching the candles drip wax onto the pristine white tablecloth. The silence was deafening. Not even the sound of my own breathing seemed to matter in that moment. I checked my phone obsessively. The old flip phone Michael had given me years ago because smartphones were too complicated for someone my age. Nothing. Not a text, not a voicemail, not even a wrong number to break the devastating quiet. When Michael finally arrived, it wasn't with flowers or warm wishes. He walked in like he owned the place, which, as I would soon discover, wasn't far from the truth. His expensive leather shoes clicked against my worn linoleum floor, with the authority of someone who had never known want, never understood sacrifice. He looked at my carefully prepared table, at my hopeful face, at the birthday cake with its cheerful pink roses, and his expression twisted into something I didn't recognize. This was my son, the baby I had rocked through countless sleepless nights, the toddler whose scraped knees I had kissed better, the teenager whose college tuition I had paid by working double shifts at the diner. That's when he said it. Those words that would echo in my mind for months to come. Time to buy a coffin. The room went cold. Not the kind of cold that comes from poor heating or broken windows, but the soul-deep chill that freezes you from the inside out. I felt my heart skip, literally skip. And for a moment, I wondered if he might get his wish sooner than expected. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this story really begins, to the years of giving until I had nothing left to give, to the slow erosion of my dignity that I convinced myself was just love. You see, I had built my entire identity around being needed. After David passed away 12 years ago, my children became my whole world. They were struggling. Michael with his failed business ventures that always needed just one more investment, Sarah with her messy divorce and mounting credit card debt, Emma with her college expenses and dreams of studying abroad. I had a comfortable nest egg, built from years of careful saving and David's life insurance policy. We had been modest investors in the stock market during the boom years. Nothing fancy, but enough to give us security. David had even put a small fortune into what he called the future, some Bitcoin he bought when it was practically worthless. Back then, I thought he was being foolish. Now I realize he was being wise in ways I couldn't understand. Our wealth in dollars wasn't enormous by New York standards, but for a working-class couple from the Lower East Side, it felt like a treasure. David used to joke that we had enough money to live comfortably and help our children when they truly needed it. He never imagined it would become an endless ATM machine for their every whim and poor decision. The first time Michael asked for money, he was 28, and his restaurant had failed. "Mom," he said, sitting in the very chair where he would years later suggest I buy a coffin, "I just need $50,000 to get back on my feet. It's an investment in my future." I gave it to him, not as a loan, though he promised to pay it back, as a gift, because that's what mothers do. We sacrifice our security for our children's dreams. The second time, it was Sarah. Her husband had left her, taking their savings and leaving her with their mortgage and 2 kids to raise alone. "I don't know where else to turn," she sobbed over the phone. "I'm about to lose the house." I mortgaged my own apartment to help her. Again, not as a loan, as love made manifest in dollars and cents. The pattern continued for years. Michael's second restaurant, Sarah's car repairs, Emma's private school tuition because the public schools weren't good enough, Michael's third restaurant, Sarah's medical bills, Emma's study abroad program that would change her life forever. Each time, I told myself this would be the last time. Each time, I watched my savings dwindle, my investment portfolio shrink, my security evaporate, but they were my children, my blood, my responsibility. "Mom, you're incredible," Sarah would say after each transfer of funds. "We're so grateful." Michael would nod and promise to make it up to me. Emma would throw her arms around my neck and call me her hero. But gratitude, I learned, has an expiration date. The phone calls became shorter, the visits less frequent. The promises to pay me back turned into vague mentions of when things turn around. My birthday began to feel like an afterthought. Christmas became about what I could give rather than being together. And holidays became expensive obligations rather than celebrations. I started to notice the little things. How they would glance at their phones when I was speaking. How conversations shifted quickly away from my health, my interests, my life. How they spoke about me to each other. I could hear it sometimes when they thought I was out of earshot. "She's got plenty of money," I heard Michael tell Sarah once during a holiday dinner. "She's just being dramatic about giving us loans." Loans. When had my gifts become loans? When had my love become transactions? The microaggressions started small. Sarah canceling our weekly coffee dates because she was super busy, but posting photos of lunch with friends on her social media. Michael forgetting my birthday 2 years in a row, then showing up a week later asking for money for his newest venture, a day trading scheme that would surely make him rich. Emma, my sweet granddaughter who had once been my constant companion, began treating our time together like a chore. She would text instead of calling, answer my questions with single words, and always have somewhere else she needed to be. I told myself they were just busy. Young people today, always rushing, always connected to their devices, always stressed about money and careers and the future. I made excuses for them because the alternative, accepting that I had become little more than a bank account with a heartbeat, was too painful to consider. But pain has a way of demanding acknowledgement, doesn't it? My health began to suffer. The stress of constant worry. The sleepless nights spent wondering if I had enough saved for my own emergencies. The growing realization that I had given away my security for children who saw me as an inconvenience. I developed an irregular heartbeat. The doctor called it atrial fibrillation, brought on by stress and anxiety. I tried to tell my children about the diagnosis, about the medications I was taking, about my fears of being alone if something serious happened. "You'll be fine, Mom," Sarah said, barely looking up from her phone during one of our increasingly rare visits. "You're strong. You've always been strong." Strong. The word had become a prison. I was expected to be strong while their lives fell apart around them. Strong enough to keep giving money I didn't have. Strong enough to accept their neglect as normal. Strong enough to pretend that being treated like an ATM was the same as being loved. The morning of my 75th birthday, I woke up with hope. Foolish, stubborn hope that somehow this milestone would remind them that I was still here, still their mother, still worthy of love and attention that didn't come with a price tag. I spent hours preparing. I cleaned every surface in my small apartment. I arranged fresh flowers in the vase David had given me for our 20th anniversary. I cooked their favorite foods: Michael's beloved pot roast, Sarah's favorite apple pie, Emma's requested chocolate chip cookies. The table was set with military precision. 5 places, just like the old days when David was still alive, and Sunday dinners were sacred family time. I put on my best jewelry, the pearls David had given me for our 25th anniversary, the ones I rarely wore anymore because there was no one left to dress up for. I waited, and waited, and waited. At 4 in the afternoon, Michael finally showed up. Alone. No Sarah, no Emma, no explanation for where the rest of my family might be. He walked in like he was doing me a favor, checking his expensive watch, sighing as if my birthday was an inconvenient interruption to his important life. That's when I learned that the family dinner I had planned, the celebration I had prepared for, had been canceled. Not postponed, canceled. They had made other plans. Sarah was at a work function she couldn't get out of. Emma was studying for finals and couldn't be distracted, but no one had told me. I found out when Michael mentioned, casually, as if discussing the weather, that he couldn't stay long because he was meeting a client for drinks. When I asked about the others, when I mentioned the dinner I had prepared, he looked at me like I was speaking a foreign language. "Mom, we talked about this," he said, though we absolutely had not. "Everyone's busy. You know how it is." I didn't know how it was. I didn't know how my 75th birthday had become an inconvenience. I didn't know how my children had become strangers who saw me as an obligation rather than their mother. But I was about to learn so much more. As I stood there, surrounded by the food I had prepared with love, wearing my best dress and my anniversary pearls, Michael looked at me with an expression I can only describe as calculating. His eyes traveled from my carefully arranged table to my hopeful face, and something cold flickered across his features. "You know, Mom," he said, his voice casual in a way that made my skin crawl. "At your age, you should really think about making arrangements. You know what I mean. Time to buy a coffin." The words hit me like a physical blow. I actually stumbled backward, gripping the edge of my kitchen counter for support. My carefully applied lipstick felt suddenly garish, my best dress like a costume I was too old to wear. Time to buy a coffin. On my birthday, my 75th birthday, standing in the apartment where I had raised him, surrounded by the evidence of a lifetime spent putting his needs before my own. "Michael," I whispered, my voice barely audible over the sound of my heart breaking. "How can you say that to me?" He shrugged, actually shrugged, as if suggesting your mother purchase her own casket was as normal as commenting on the weather. "I'm being practical, Mom. You're not getting any younger, and these things cost money. Better to plan ahead. Plan ahead." As if my death was a minor inconvenience he needed to budget for. I watched my son, my firstborn, the baby I had carried for 9 months and loved for 47 years, check his watch again and gather his keys. He was already mentally gone, already moved on to his next appointment, his important client meeting, his life that had no room for his aging mother except as a source of funds. "I have to go," he said, pausing at the door. "Happy birthday, I guess." And then he was gone, leaving me alone with my beautiful table set for 5, my carefully prepared food growing cold, and words that would echo in my mind for months to come. Time to buy a coffin. I stood there for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes, trying to process what had just happened. The apartment felt different now, smaller and more suffocating than before. The flowers I had so carefully arranged seemed to mock me with their vibrant colors. The good china looked antique and sad under the harsh kitchen lighting. I walked slowly to my bedroom, each step feeling like I was moving through thick water. In my dresser mirror, I caught sight of myself, an old woman in a navy dress with tiny flowers, wearing pearls that had once symbolized love, and now felt like shackles to a past that no longer mattered. My reflection looked back at me with questions I wasn't ready to answer. When had I become this person? When had my love become something to be tolerated rather than treasured? When had my very existence become such a burden that my own son could suggest I prepare for death as casually as he might recommend a restaurant? I sat on the edge of my bed, the same bed where David and I had made love and shared dreams and planned our future together. The same bed where I had worried through Michael's fevers as a child, where Sarah had crawled in during thunderstorms, where Emma had curled up to hear stories about the old days when Grandpa was still alive. Now it felt like a piece of furniture in a museum, a relic from a time when I mattered to someone other than bill collectors and insurance companies. That's when the phone rang. I almost didn't answer it. It was probably a telemarketer or a survey, the only calls I seemed to receive anymore. But something made me pick up the old cordless phone, the one with buttons large enough for my arthritic fingers to manage. Mrs. Elizabeth Morgan? The voice was crisp, professional, unfamiliar. Yes, I said, though the word came out as barely more than a whisper. This is Jennifer Thompson from Thompson, Rodriguez and Associates. I'm calling regarding your late husband's estate and some irregularities we've discovered in your financial accounts. My heart, which had already been struggling with rhythm issues, began to pound irregularly. Financial irregularities? David's estate had been settled years ago. Everything had been properly transferred to my name, or so I thought. I'm sorry, I said, trying to clear my head of the fog that had settled there since Michael's visit. What kind of irregularities? Mrs. Morgan, I'd prefer to discuss this in person. Are you available to come to my office tomorrow morning? There are some documents you need to see and some signatures that require your immediate attention. Something in her tone made my stomach clench. This wasn't a routine call about taxes or paperwork. This was something bigger, something that required immediate attention and in-person meetings. Can you give me any idea what this is about? I asked. There was a pause, the kind of pause that comes before life-changing news. Mrs. Morgan, it appears that someone has been transferring assets from your accounts without your knowledge or consent. We need to discuss this as soon as possible. The phone slipped from my hand, clattering to the floor. Transferring assets without my knowledge? Who would have access to my accounts? Who would even know about the investments David had made, the small fortune he had carefully built for our retirement, for my security? As I bent to retrieve the phone, my mind began to race through the possibilities. The only people who knew about my financial situation were my children. The only people I had ever shared account information with. The only people I had ever trusted with power of attorney documents during my recent surgery. Mrs. Morgan? Are you there? I picked up the phone with trembling hands. Yes, I'm sorry. What time tomorrow? 10 a.m. if that works for you. And Mrs. Morgan? Please bring any financial documents you have at home. Bank statements, investment records, any papers related to your accounts or properties. Properties, plural. I owned one property, this apartment. At least I thought I did. After I hung up, I sat in the growing darkness of my bedroom, not bothering to turn on the lights. Outside, the sounds of the Lower East Side evening began. Traffic, voices, life moving forward while mine seemed to have ground to a halt. I thought about Michael's words, about the casual cruelty of suggesting I buy my own coffin. I thought about the lawyer's call, about financial irregularities and unauthorized transfers. I thought about the pattern that had been building for years, the constant requests for money, the growing distance, the way my children treated me like an inconvenience rather than their mother. A terrible picture began to form in my mind, piece by terrible piece. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my kitchen table with every financial document I could find spread out before me. Bank statements, investment records, insurance policies, the deed to my apartment, papers that represented a lifetime of careful saving, of David's wise investments, of the security we had built together for our old age. I tried to make sense of the numbers, but they didn't add up. Accounts that should have had substantial balances showed much lower amounts. Investment funds that David had specifically set aside for my care were missing entirely. Even the Bitcoin wallet he had set up, worth hundreds of thousands of dollars now, showed a balance of zero. By morning, I felt hollow inside, like someone had scooped out everything that made me who I was and left behind an empty shell. But underneath the grief and betrayal, something else was stirring, something I hadn't felt in years. Anger. Pure, clean, righteous anger. At 10 a.m. sharp, I sat in Jennifer Thompson's office in Tribeca, surrounded by legal books and certificates on the wall that spoke of competence and success. Ms. Thompson was younger than I expected, maybe 50, with kind eyes behind sharp glasses and silver hair pulled back in a professional bun. She spread documents across her mahogany desk like a detective laying out evidence of a crime. Mrs. Morgan, she said gently, I need you to look at these signatures and tell me if they're yours. I examined each document carefully. They were authorization forms, transfer documents, power of attorney papers. And at the bottom of each one was a signature that looked like mine but wasn't quite right. The E in Elizabeth was too rounded. The M in Morgan curved the wrong way. These aren't my signatures, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. That's what our handwriting expert confirmed, Ms. Thompson said. Mrs. Morgan, someone has been forging your signature to transfer money from your accounts. Over the past 3 years, approximately $400,000 has been moved from your various investment accounts to accounts controlled by your son, Michael Morgan. $400,000. Nearly everything David and I had saved. Everything we had invested. Everything we had planned to keep me secure in my old age. The transfers coincide with times when you've given him temporary power of attorney for medical procedures, Ms. Thompson continued. It appears he's been using those limited authorizations to access accounts he wasn't supposed to touch. I thought about the times I had signed power of attorney documents. When I had my gallbladder surgery 2 years ago. When I had cataract surgery last year. When I had needed someone to handle my affairs during medical procedures, I had trusted my son to act in my best interests. Instead, he had been stealing from me. There's more, Ms. Thompson said, her voice grave. The deed to your apartment was transferred to his name 6 months ago. According to these documents, you sold the apartment to him for $1. I felt the room spin around me. My apartment, the home I had shared with David for 30 years, the place where my children had grown up, where my granddaughter had learned to walk. It no longer belonged to me. I never signed any such document, I whispered. I believe you, Ms. Thompson said, and we're going to fight this. All of it. But I need to ask you a difficult question, Mrs. Morgan. Was anyone else involved in this? Your daughter? Your granddaughter? I thought about Sarah's constant financial crises, about how she always seemed to know exactly how much money I had available to help her. I thought about Emma's expensive private school, her study abroad program, her casual assumption that Grandma's money would always be there when she needed it. I don't know, I said, and meant it. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that I couldn't tell where it began or ended. Ms. Thompson leaned forward, her expression fierce. Mrs. Morgan, what happened to you is elder financial abuse. It's a crime, and it's more common than you might think. Children who see their aging parents as ATM machines, who convince themselves they're entitled to money their parents worked a lifetime to save. Elder financial abuse. The words had a clinical sound that somehow made the personal betrayal feel even worse. What can I do? I asked. We fight, she said simply. We file criminal charges. We get restraining orders if necessary. We take back what's yours and make sure it never happens again. For the first time in months, I felt something other than despair. Hope was too strong a word, but maybe determination, maybe resolve. What do I do first? I asked. First, you change every password, every account number, every access code you've ever shared. Second, you tell your family that the bank is closed. No more money, no more loans, no more helping out. And third, you prepare yourself for them to be angry. Angry. I almost laughed. They were going to be angry with me for refusing to let them steal from me anymore. I left Ms. Thompson's office with a folder full of legal documents and a plan of action. For the first time in years, I had a sense of purpose that wasn't centered around making other people happy at the expense of my own well-being. The walk back to my apartment, regardless of what some forged documents claimed, felt different. The city around me seemed more vivid, more alive. The smell of food trucks and car exhaust, the sounds of construction and conversation, even the pigeons fighting over crumbs in the small park. Everything felt more real than it had in months. That afternoon, I did something I had never done in my 75 years of life. I changed my phone number without telling anyone. The silence that followed was both terrifying and liberating. For the first time in decades, my phone didn't ring with requests for money, complaints about my shortcomings as a mother, or casual cruelty disguised as concern for my well-being. I sat in my quiet apartment and tried to remember who I had been before I became defined by what I could give to other people. Elizabeth Morgan, wife of David, mother of Michael and Sarah, grandmother to Emma. But who was I beyond those relationships? What did I want? What made me happy? The last question was the hardest to answer because I couldn't remember the last time I had done something purely for my own joy. That evening, I did something unprecedented. I ordered Chinese takeout for one and ate it while watching an old movie on television. No rushing to answer the phone, no worrying about who needed what, no calculating how much money I had left to give away. Just me, General Tso's chicken, and Cary Grant being charming in black and white. It was the most peaceful evening I had experienced in years. The next morning, my old phone, the one whose number I had shared with my family, had 17 missed calls, all from Michael. The voicemails started apologetic and quickly became demanding, then angry, then almost threatening. "Mom, I need to talk to you immediately. There are some problems with the bank and I need your help to sort them out. Mom, this is ridiculous. Not answering your phone is childish. Call me back right now. Mom, I don't know what game you're playing, but it's not funny. Sarah and Emma are worried sick about you." The last message was the most revealing. "Mom, if you don't call me back, I'm going to have to assume you're having mental health issues and take appropriate action." Appropriate action. Meaning, I assumed, having me declared incompetent so he could continue stealing from me legally. I deleted all the messages and turned off the phone. 3 days later, there was pounding on my apartment door. Not knocking, pounding. The aggressive, demanding sound of someone who expected immediate compliance. "Mom, I know you're in there. Open this door right now." Michael's voice, filled with an anger I had never heard before. This wasn't the son who had asked for loans or suggested I buy a coffin. This was a man whose source of income had suddenly dried up, and he was furious about it. I sat quietly on my couch, not moving, barely breathing. The pounding continued for several minutes, followed by loud demands that I open the door, accusations that I was being manipulative and cruel, threats about what would happen if I didn't start cooperating. Eventually, the noise stopped. But 15 minutes later, I heard the sound of a key in my lock. My blood went cold. Michael had a key to my apartment. Of course he did. He owned it now, according to those forged documents. The door opened, and Michael walked in like he owned the place, which legally he apparently did. Behind him came Sarah and Emma, both looking uncomfortable but united in their presence. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" Michael demanded. "You change your phone number without telling anyone. You won't return calls. You're acting like—" "Like what?" I interrupted, finding my voice. "Like I have a right to privacy in my own home?" "This isn't your home anymore," Michael said, and the words hit me like a slap. "You signed it over to me, remember? You're living here because I allow it." The casual cruelty of that statement took my breath away. I was living in my own home because my son allowed it, after stealing it from me with forged documents. Sarah stepped forward, her expression a practiced mixture of concern and condescension. "Mom, we're worried about you. You're not acting like yourself. Maybe it's time to think about assisted living, somewhere with people who can keep an eye on you." Assisted living, where I would have even less control over my life and finances. Emma hung back, looking miserable but saying nothing. My granddaughter, who had once been my closest companion, couldn't even meet my eyes. "I'm fine," I said, standing up straighter. "I'm clearer than I've been in years, actually." "No, you're not," Michael said, his voice taking on the tone he might use with a confused child. "You're being paranoid and difficult. The bank called about some irregularities in your accounts. You mean the money you stole from me?" The words came out before I could stop them, and the room went completely silent. Michael's face went through several expressions: surprise, denial, anger, calculation. "I don't know what you're talking about," he said finally. "The $400,000 you transferred from my investment accounts using forged signatures," I said, my voice growing stronger with each word. "The apartment deed you falsified. The Bitcoin wallet you emptied. Should I continue?" Sarah's face had gone pale. Emma looked sick. But Michael's expression hardened into something I barely recognized. "You're confused, Mom. You gave me power of attorney. You asked me to help manage your finances because you were getting mixed up about things. And you definitely signed the deed transfer. We talked about it for months. The gaslighting was so smooth, so practiced, that for a moment I almost doubted myself. Almost. But I had legal documents now, expert analysis, proof of what had been done to me. "Get out," I said quietly. "What?" Sarah stepped forward, her voice rising. "Mom, you can't just—" "Get out of my home," I said, louder now. "All of you. Right now." Michael laughed. Actually laughed. "Your home? Mom, I own this apartment. You're living here because I'm being generous. But if you want to be difficult about this, maybe it's time to reconsider that generosity." The threat was clear. Behave or become homeless. I looked at my children, my son who had stolen from me, my daughter who had enabled him, my granddaughter who had stood by and watched it happen, and felt something fundamental shift inside me. I said, "Get out." "Fine," Michael said, heading toward the door. "But don't come crying to us when you need help. We're done playing games." Sarah followed him, pausing at the door to deliver one final blow. "I hope you're proud of yourself, Mom. You're destroying this family over money. Over money. As if I was the one who had made money more important than love." Emma was the last to leave, and she stopped near my chair, tears in her eyes. "Grandma," she whispered, "I didn't know." "Yes, you did," I said gently but firmly. "You all knew. You just didn't care." After they left, I sat in the silence of my apartment, regardless of what any forged documents claimed, and waited to feel something. Regret, maybe. Loneliness. Fear. Instead, I felt lighter than I had in years. That night, I called Ms. Thompson and told her I was ready to file charges. "Are you sure?" she asked. "Once we start this process, there's no going back. Your relationship with your family will never be the same." I thought about that. About family dinners filled with tension and unspoken resentment. About birthday celebrations that felt more like obligations. About love that came with price tags and conditions. "My relationship with my family has been over for years," I said. I was just too afraid to admit it. The legal process moved faster than I expected. Within a week, freezing orders were placed on accounts. Within 2 weeks, the forged signatures were confirmed by experts. Within a month, criminal charges were filed for elder financial abuse, identity theft, and fraud. Michael hired an expensive lawyer and continued to claim that I was confused, that I had willingly given him access to my accounts and property. But lawyers, it turns out, are much better at detecting lies than loving mothers who want to believe their children are good people. The evidence was overwhelming. The patterns of theft corresponded exactly with times when I had limited power of attorney forms on file. The signatures were proven forgeries. The apartment transfer was so obviously fraudulent that even Michael's lawyer seemed embarrassed to defend it. But the legal victory, satisfying as it was, came with an unexpected cost. I was completely alone. Not just temporarily alone, while relationships healed and wounds mended. Truly, completely alone in a way I had never experienced before. My children had turned their friends and extended family against me with stories about my mental decline and paranoid accusations. Neighbors who had once been friendly now crossed the street to avoid me, convinced I was a bitter old woman who had turned against her own children over money. The isolation was suffocating. There were days when I wondered if I had made the right choice. Days when I sat in my quiet apartment and thought about how much easier it would be to call Michael, apologize for the misunderstanding, and go back to the way things were. At least then I wouldn't be spending Christmas alone. At least then someone would call to check on me during the power outage that left me in darkness for 8 hours. Those were the hardest days. But they were also the days when I discovered something remarkable about myself. I was stronger than I had ever imagined. Not strong in the way my family had demanded, endlessly giving, perpetually self-sacrificing, always available to solve other people's problems. Strong in a different way. Strong enough to sit with loneliness and not let it destroy me. Strong enough to choose dignity over false comfort. Strong enough to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. It started small. I began taking walks through the neighborhood, not rushing to get home to answer phone calls that never came anyway. I noticed things I had missed before, the way morning light fell across the fire escapes, the sounds of children playing in the small park, the smell of bread from the bakery on the corner. I bought myself flowers. Not for any special occasion, just because they were beautiful and I wanted beauty in my life. I arranged them in the vase David had given me and realized I had been waiting for someone else to bring me flowers when I could bring them to myself. I joined a senior center art class, something I had always wanted to do but never had time for when I was constantly managing other people's crises. My hands, arthritic as they were, remembered how to hold a brush, how to mix colors, how to create something beautiful from nothing. The other students in the class were kind. Not politely kind in the way people are when they feel sorry for you, but genuinely kind. They shared stories about their own families, their own disappointments, their own journeys toward finding peace in their later years. Many of their stories sounded familiar. Margaret, a 78-year-old former nurse, had worked herself into poverty supporting a son who gambled away every dollar she gave him. "I thought I was helping him," she said, as she painted gentle watercolor flowers. "Turns out I was just enabling him to avoid growing up." Robert, a 82-year-old widower, had given his daughter the down payment for 3 different houses, only to watch her lose each one to foreclosure because she spent the money on luxury items instead of mortgage payments. "She called me selfish for finally saying no," he said with a dry laugh. Imagine that. Being called selfish by someone who had been stealing from me for years. I wasn't alone in my experience. I wasn't uniquely stupid or weak or unloved. I was part of a sadly common story. Aging parents who had mistaken being used for being needed, who had confused financial generosity with family connection. The art class became my anchor. 3 mornings a week, I would walk to the community center and spend 2 hours creating something beautiful, surrounded by people who understood what it meant to rebuild your life after betrayal by those who were supposed to love you most. My paintings started dark, muddy browns and grays that reflected my emotional state. But gradually, colors began to creep in. Soft blues like David's eyes, warm yellows like the morning light in our old apartment, deep reds like the roses he used to bring me. 6 months after that terrible birthday dinner, I had my first art show. Nothing fancy, just a corner of the community center where they displayed work by students in various art programs. But there were my paintings, matted and framed, with little white labels that said Elizabeth Morgan underneath. I stood in front of my work and felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Pride. Not pride in what I had given to someone else. Not pride in how I had sacrificed for other people's benefit. But pride in something I had created purely for the joy of creating it. A young woman with kind eyes stopped next to me, studying one of my paintings. A small watercolor of the view from my apartment window at sunset. "This is beautiful," she said. "My grandmother would have loved this. She used to paint too before." She trailed off, but I understood. Before family obligations took over. Before other people's needs became more important than her own creativity. "It's never too late to start again," I told her. "Is that what you did?" she asked. I thought about the question. Had I started again, or had I simply remembered who I was before I lost myself in other people's needs? "I guess I did," I said. That night, I came home to my quiet apartment. My apartment, legally mine again thanks to Ms. Thompson's excellent work, and realized something remarkable had happened. I was happy. Not the desperate, fleeting happiness that comes from external validation or other people's approval. Not the anxious happiness of anticipating family visits or phone calls, but a deep, steady contentment that came from within. I made myself dinner. Nothing fancy, just scrambled eggs and toast, and ate it while reading a book I had chosen purely because it interested me. I took a hot bath with lavender soap I had bought myself. I put on soft pajamas and settled into bed with a cup of chamomile tea. No one needed me that night. No one called asking for money or help or emotional support. No one required my attention or demanded my energy. And for the first time in decades, that felt like freedom instead of abandonment. The seasons changed, and so did I. My hair, which I had always kept in a practical style that required minimum maintenance, was now colored a warm auburn and cut in soft layers that framed my face. I bought clothes that flattered my figure instead of hiding it. I wore jewelry because it made me feel beautiful, not because it had sentimental value. I looked in the mirror and saw someone I barely recognized. A woman who took care of herself, who valued her own opinions, who didn't apologize for taking up space in the world. One morning, almost exactly a year after that devastating birthday dinner, I received an unexpected phone call on my new number, one that only a few people had access to. "Mrs. Morgan? This is Emma, your granddaughter." My heart clenched and soared at the same time. Emma, my sweet granddaughter who had stood by while her father stole from me, who had watched in silence as he suggested I buy my own coffin. "Emma," I said carefully, "how did you get this number?" "Mrs. Alvarez from your building," she said. "I've been trying to reach you for months." Mrs. Alvarez, my kind neighbor who had become one of my few remaining friends. I had asked her not to share my contact information with my family, but apparently she had made an exception. "I'm in college now," Emma continued, her voice nervous but determined. "And I've been thinking a lot about what happened, about what Dad did to you, what we all did to you." I waited, not sure what to expect. "I didn't know," she said, and started crying. "I mean, I knew something wasn't right, but I didn't know about the money. I didn't know about the apartment. I just knew that everyone was always angry and tense, and you seemed so sad all the time." "Emma, please let me finish," she said. "I need to say this. What we did to you was wrong. What I did was wrong. I should have stood up for you. I should have asked questions when Dad started saying you were confused and paranoid. I should have visited more, called more, cared more." The words I had longed to hear for so long that I had stopped believing I would ever hear them. "I should have been a better granddaughter," she said through her tears. "And I know it's too late, and I know you probably never want to see any of us again. But I needed you to know that I'm sorry. I'm so, so sorry." I sat in my quiet apartment, holding the phone and listening to my granddaughter cry, and felt my carefully constructed walls begin to crack. "Emma," I said gently, "where are you right now?" "I'm at school in Syracuse, but I could come home this weekend if you wanted to see me." Did I want to see her? The granddaughter who had been my joy and my hope, who had sat by my side for countless hours, who had called me her hero before she learned to see me as an ATM? The young woman who had watched her father steal from me and done nothing to stop it? "Yes," I said, surprising myself. "I would like that." That Saturday, Emma came to visit. She looked older than her 20 years, more serious, less carefree than when I had last seen her. She brought flowers, daisies my favorite, and a card she had made herself. We sat at my kitchen table, the same table where Michael had suggested I buy a coffin, and talked honestly for the first time in years. "I was scared," she admitted. "Dad always said you were getting confused, that you were imagining things. And Mom backed him up. I was just a kid, and I believed them." "You weren't just a kid when it happened," I pointed out. "You were 19, 20, old enough to think for yourself." She nodded, tears streaming down her face. "You're right. I was old enough to know better. I was just scared of him, I guess. Dad has this way of making you feel stupid if you question him. And I was getting so much financial help for school. I was afraid if I made waves, it would all disappear." The honesty was brutal, but necessary. "So you chose the money over me," I said. "Yes," she whispered. "And I hate myself for it." We sat in silence for several minutes, both of us crying. Not the desperate tears of manipulation or guilt, but the cleansing tears of truth finally spoken. "What's happening with your father now?" I asked. "He's furious," she said. "The criminal charges, the financial investigation, having to pay back the money, it's destroyed his life. His business failed. His marriage is falling apart. Mom blames you for everything." I waited to feel satisfaction at their downfall, some sense of justice being served. Instead, I felt mostly sadness. Sadness that it had come to this. Sadness that money had become more important than love. Sadness that I had lost years of my life trying to buy affection from people who were never going to love me the way I deserved to be loved. "Do you blame me?" I asked Emma. She was quiet for a long time, obviously thinking carefully about her answer. "I blame Dad," she said finally. "I blame myself. I blame all of us for creating a situation where you had to choose between being respected and being family. That should never have happened. What do you want from me now?" I asked, not unkindly, but directly. "Nothing," she said, and I believed her. "I don't want money or help or anything like that. I'm working my way through school now, taking out loans like most students do. I just wanted to apologize. And maybe start over, if that's possible. Start over. The phrase held such promise and such terror. I'm not the same person I was a year ago, I told her. I won't go back to being the grandmother who solves everyone's problems with her checkbook. I won't be taken advantage of again, not even by you. I wouldn't want you to, she said. The grandmother who raised me was strong and independent and creative. Somewhere along the way, we turned you into someone else. Someone whose only value was what she could give us. I want to know the real you again. The real me. Did I even know who that was anymore? I'd like that too, I said. Emma stayed for dinner that night. Nothing fancy, just pasta with marinara sauce and a salad. But we talked like we used to when she was young, about books and movies and her dreams for the future. She told me about her art history classes, about her plans to work in a museum after graduation, about the young man she was dating who made her laugh. I told her about my painting class, about the friends I had made at the senior center, about the trip to Vermont I was planning for the fall. You're going to Vermont alone? She asked. Yes, I said, and realized that the thought didn't scare me anymore. I've never traveled by myself before. I thought it was time. She smiled. The first genuine smile I had seen from her in years. That sounds wonderful, Grandma. Really wonderful. When she left that evening, we hugged goodbye. Not the perfunctory hug of obligation, but a real embrace between two people who cared about each other and were willing to do the work necessary to rebuild trust. Can I call you next week? She asked. I'd like that, I said. After she left, I cleaned up the dinner dishes and reflected on the day. Forgiveness, I realized, wasn't a single moment of decision. It was an ongoing process, a choice I would have to make over and over again. And it didn't mean forgetting what had happened or pretending the betrayal hadn't occurred. It meant choosing to move forward without carrying the poison of bitterness in my heart. Emma had taken the first step by admitting her role in what happened and asking for nothing in return. Whether Michael and Sarah would ever do the same remained to be seen. But their choices were no longer my responsibility. My responsibility was to continue building this new life I had created, one where my worth wasn't determined by my usefulness to others. The following week, Emma called, as promised. And the week after that. Gradually, we developed a new relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. She told me about her struggles and successes at school, but she didn't ask me to solve her problems. I shared my own journey of self-discovery, my painting class victories, my small adventures in independence. When she graduated from college 6 months later, she invited me to the ceremony. I almost said no. The thought of seeing Michael and Sarah again made my stomach clench with anxiety. But Emma asked nothing else of me, made no demands that I facilitate some grand family reconciliation. She simply wanted her grandmother there to celebrate her achievement. So I went. I bought a new dress for the occasion, a soft blue that brought out my eyes, and had my hair done professionally. I felt confident and elegant, very different from the desperate, depleted woman I had been a year and a half earlier. The graduation was beautiful. I watched Emma walk across the stage to receive her diploma, magna cum laude, and felt genuine pride in her accomplishment. She had worked her way through school, taken out loans, earned scholarships. She had learned what I had finally learned, the difference between help and dependence, between love and transaction. Michael and Sarah were there, of course. They looked older, harder, worn down by legal troubles and financial difficulties. Michael's hair had gone completely gray, and Sarah had the pinched expression of someone who felt perpetually wronged by the world. They saw me, of course. In a crowd of a few hundred people, they couldn't miss me in my bright blue dress, sitting in the family section Emma had reserved for me. But they made no attempt to approach, and I made no effort to reach out to them. Some wounds are too deep to heal with a smile and a wave across a crowded auditorium. After the ceremony, Emma ran to me first, before her parents, before her friends. She threw her arms around me and whispered, "Thank you for coming, Grandma. Thank you for being here." "I wouldn't have missed it," I said, and meant it. Later, at the reception, I watched my family from across the room. Michael and Sarah stood together but not close, their body language suggesting a marriage hanging by threads. They spoke in clipped, tense sentences and avoided looking at me whenever possible. A year ago, their obvious unhappiness would have broken my heart. I would have wanted to fix their problems, offer help, bridge the distance between us. Now, I felt mostly indifferent. Their problems were their own to solve. Their unhappiness was the consequence of their choices, and their relationship with me, or lack thereof, was something they would have to live with. I was no longer losing sleep over people who had chosen greed over love. Emma brought her boyfriend over to meet me, a sweet young man named David, named after my late husband, she told me later. He was studying to be a teacher, and his eyes lit up when he talked about working with children. When Emma went to get us drinks, he stayed with me, asking about my art classes and my plans for Vermont. "Emma talks about you all the time," he said, "about how proud she is that you stood up for yourself. She says you're her hero." Hero. The word I had longed to hear from my family for so many years, now spoken by a young man who barely knew me but saw me clearly. "She's the one who did the hard work," I said. "It takes real character to admit when you're wrong and try to make it right." "She learned that from you," he said simply. Maybe she had. Maybe my years of sacrifice hadn't been entirely wasted if they had taught her something about integrity and courage. That night, back in my apartment in the Lower East Side, I sat by my window and watched the city lights twinkle below. The same view I had stared at during those dark months of betrayal and isolation, but everything looked different now. I was different now. The woman who had sat in this same spot 18 months ago, weeping over a birthday dinner and a son's cruel words, had been focused on what she was losing. The woman I was now understood what I had gained. I had gained self-respect. I had gained the knowledge that I could survive alone, that solitude didn't have to mean loneliness if I was comfortable in my own company. I had gained new friendships based on mutual interest rather than mutual need. I had gained creative expression and the joy of learning new skills at an age when society expected me to be winding down. Most importantly, I had gained the understanding that love doesn't require me to diminish myself. Real love, the kind David and I had shared, the kind I was slowly rebuilding with Emma, the kind I saw between my new friends at the senior center, was about celebrating each other, not consuming each other. My phone rang, breaking me out of my reverie. Emma's name appeared on the caller ID. "Grandma," she said, "I just wanted to say thank you again for today. Having you there meant everything to me." "It meant everything to me too," I said. "And Grandma, I know this might not be the right time to ask, but would you maybe want to come to dinner next Sunday? Just you and me and David. I'm learning how to cook, and I thought maybe we could start a new tradition. A new tradition. Sunday dinners without manipulation, without hidden agendas, without someone calculating the cost of every interaction. I'd love that," I said. After we hung up, I made myself a cup of tea and sat back down by the window. Tomorrow, I would go to my art class and work on a new painting, something bright and hopeful, full of the colors that had slowly returned to my life. Next week, I would have dinner with Emma and David, building a new kind of family relationship. Next month, I would take my trip to Vermont, my first solo adventure in 76 years. The future stretched ahead of me, full of possibilities I had never considered when I thought my only value came from what I could give to others. I thought about Michael's words from that terrible birthday. Time to buy a coffin. He had meant it as cruelty, as a reminder of my mortality and irrelevance. But in a strange way, he had been right. It had been time to buy a coffin. For the old Elizabeth, the woman who had confused love with financial support, who had mistaken being used for being needed. That Elizabeth was dead and buried. The woman who sat by this window now, planning art projects and solo trips and dinners with a granddaughter who valued her for who she was, rather than what she could provide. This woman was very much alive. This woman had a future. As I prepared for bed that night, I caught sight of myself in the bathroom mirror. The face looking back at me was older, lined with the experiences of 76 years, but it was also serene in a way it hadn't been for decades. My eyes were clear and bright. My posture was straight and confident. My expression was peaceful. I looked like a woman who knew her own worth. 6 months later, I stood on a mountain trail in Vermont, breathing in air so clean it made my lungs ache with pleasure. The fall foliage was spectacular. Reds and golds and oranges that made my artist's heart sing. I had hiked 2 miles that morning, something I hadn't done since I was in my 50s, and I felt strong and capable and gloriously alive. I was wearing hiking boots and a backpack, carrying a water bottle and trail mix like any other adventurous traveler. At 76, I was discovering parts of myself I never knew existed. That evening, back at the cozy bed and breakfast where I was staying, I called Emma to tell her about my day. "Grandma, you're amazing," she laughed when I described my hiking adventure. "I can barely walk up 3 flights of stairs without getting winded, and you're climbing mountains." "Not climbing," I corrected. "Walking on trails. But it feels like climbing mountains." "How much longer are you staying?" she asked. "Another 3 days," I said. "I'm taking a painting workshop tomorrow, and then I want to visit some of the local galleries." "I'm so proud of you," she said, and I heard tears in her voice. "For everything you've done this year, for standing up to Dad, for taking care of yourself, for showing me what real strength looks like." "What does real strength look like?" I asked, curious about her perspective. "Like you," she said simply. "Like someone who chooses dignity over convenience. Like someone who builds a new life instead of staying trapped in an old one that wasn't working." That night, I sat in the common room of the bed and breakfast, sketching fellow guests and listening to their stories. There was a couple celebrating their 50th anniversary, a group of women friends taking their annual fall trip, a man my age traveling alone like me, following his passion for photographing covered bridges. Everyone had stories of challenges overcome, dreams pursued, relationships that had disappointed, and relationships that had sustained them. I was not unique in my struggles, but I was also not unique in my resilience. We were all works in progress, all learning and growing and discovering new facets of ourselves, regardless of our age. When I flew home from Vermont a few days later, I carried with me a small painting I had done in the workshop, a watercolor of the mountain view from my hiking trail. It wasn't technically perfect, but it captured something important: the feeling of standing on solid ground, looking out at a vast landscape of possibilities. I hung the painting in my apartment, right next to the window where I liked to sit and watch the city. Every time I looked at it, I remembered that feeling of strength and independence and joy in my own company. Over the following months, my life continued to evolve. I joined a book club and discovered I had strong opinions about literature. I volunteered at a literacy program and found deep satisfaction in helping adults learn to read. I took cooking classes and learned to prepare meals that pleased me rather than others. Emma and I maintained our Sunday dinner tradition, sometimes joined by David, sometimes just the two of us. Our relationship deepened and matured, built on genuine affection and mutual respect rather than habit and obligation. She never asked me for money, and I never offered unsolicited advice about her life choices. We talked about art and history and her work at a local museum. We shared our hopes and struggles without either of us trying to fix the other's problems. It was the kind of relationship I had dreamed of having with my children, but never achieved with Michael and Sarah. Michael and Sarah remained absent from my life. I heard occasionally through Emma that they were struggling. Michael's business ventures continued to fail. Sarah's marriage was deteriorating. Both of them seemed trapped in patterns of blame and victimhood that prevented them from taking responsibility for their choices. I felt sadness for them, but no longer felt responsible for saving them from the consequences of their actions. Some relationships, I had learned, cannot be repaired no matter how much love or forgiveness you pour into them. Some people are not capable of seeing you as anything other than a resource to be exploited or a problem to be managed. Learning to accept this truth without bitterness had been one of the hardest lessons of my new life. 2 years after that devastating 75th birthday, I celebrated my 77th with a small party at my apartment. Emma and David were there, along with friends from my art class and book club and the literacy program. Mrs. Alvarez from down the hall brought homemade flan. Margaret from my painting class brought flowers from her garden. It was a small gathering, maybe 12 people total, but it was filled with genuine warmth and affection. These were people who knew me and liked me for who I was, not what I could do for them. Their presence in my life was a gift freely given and freely received. As we were cleaning up after the party, Emma pulled me aside. "Grandma," she said, I have something to tell you. David and I are engaged. I looked at this young woman who had once been complicit in my financial abuse and had found the courage to apologize and change. I looked at the young man who treated her with respect and kindness, who valued her mind as much as her beauty. I'm so happy for you, I said, and meant it completely. We want a small wedding, she said. Just family and close friends. And we want you to walk me down the aisle if you're willing, since Grandpa can't be there. And since since things are the way they are, walk her down the aisle. The honor traditionally reserved for fathers, offered to me not out of obligation but out of love. I would be honored, I said, tears streaming down my face. 6 months later, I stood beside Emma in a simple but beautiful ceremony in Central Park, not far from where David and I had been married 54 years earlier. She was radiant in a simple white dress, and David looked at her like she was the most precious thing in the world. As we walked down the makeshift aisle together, I thought about the journey that had brought us to this moment, the betrayal and pain that had driven us apart, the courage it had taken for her to reach out and apologize, the patience it had taken for me to forgive and trust again. It hadn't been easy. Rebuilding trust never is, but it had been worth it. Michael and Sarah were not at the wedding. Emma had sent them invitations, but made it clear that their attendance was conditional on treating me with respect. They had chosen not to come rather than agree to those terms. Their absence was noted, but not mourned. The people who were there, the friends who had supported us through difficult times, the chosen family we had built through shared values rather than blood ties, created a celebration filled with love and joy. After the ceremony, as we gathered for pictures and cake, I thought about the woman I had been 3 years earlier, broken, depleted, convinced that her only value lay in her ability to solve other people's problems with her checkbook. That woman would have been devastated by her children's absence from her granddaughter's wedding. She would have blamed herself, wondered what she could have done differently, possibly even tried to buy her way back into their good graces. The woman I was now understood that their absence was about their choices, not my worth. I had built a life filled with genuine relationships, creative expression, and personal growth. I had learned to value myself not for what I could give others, but for who I was as an individual. I had discovered strength I never knew I possessed and resilience that surprised even me. As the sun set over the city that had been my home for more than 50 years, I raised a glass of champagne and quietly toasted the journey that had brought me to this moment, to new beginnings, to second chances, to the courage to choose dignity over convenience and truth over comfortable lies, to the understanding that it's never too late to start living for yourself. The years that followed brought their own challenges and joys. Emma and David bought a small house in Queens and invited me to dinner every Sunday. I continued painting and even had a small showing at a local gallery. I traveled, not just to Vermont, but to Italy, to Ireland, to places I had dreamed about, but never thought I could visit alone. I aged, of course. My arthritis got worse, and I needed reading glasses for close work. My energy wasn't what it had been in my 70s, but I aged with grace and dignity, surrounded by people who cared about my well-being without seeing me as a burden. When I needed help, I asked for it without shame. When I wanted solitude, I took it without guilt. When opportunities for new experiences presented themselves, I embraced them without fear. I had learned the difference between being alone and being lonely. I had discovered that independence doesn't mean isolation, and that choosing yourself doesn't mean rejecting others. Most importantly, I had learned that love, real love, doesn't require sacrifice of your essential self. It requires honesty, respect, and the willingness to see and be seen clearly. Now, as I sit by my window on this quiet Sunday morning, watching the city wake up below me, I think about the journey that brought me to this place of peace. 3 years ago, my son told me it was time to buy a coffin. He meant it as cruelty, as a reminder that I was disposable, that my value had expired along with my youth. What he didn't understand is that some deaths are necessary. The death of illusions, the death of false relationships, the death of a version of yourself that was built around other people's needs rather than your own truth. I did buy a coffin, in a way. I buried the woman who confused love with financial support, who mistook being used for being needed, who believed her worth was measured by her usefulness to others. And from that burial, something new was born. A woman who knows her own value. A woman who chooses relationships based on mutual respect rather than mutual need. A woman who can sit alone in her apartment on a Sunday morning and feel completely content with her own company. This woman, the woman I am now, has a future full of possibilities. Have you ever found yourself in a similar situation, sacrificing your dignity for relationships that drain rather than sustain you? Have you watched a parent or grandparent give everything they have to children who take without gratitude? The patterns I experienced are more common than many people want to admit. Elder financial abuse affects millions of families, often perpetrated by the very people who should be protecting their aging loved ones. But this story isn't just about financial abuse. It's about the courage to stop accepting less than you deserve, regardless of your age. It's about the possibility of reinvention, even in your 70s. It's about choosing authentic relationships over convenient ones, even when that choice leads to temporary loneliness. Most of all, it's about the understanding that it's never too late to start living for yourself. If this story resonated with you, please share it in the comments below. How do you maintain healthy boundaries with family members who see you primarily as a resource? What advice would you give to someone struggling with similar issues? And if my journey has touched your heart or given you hope for your own second chances, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. By sharing these stories, we create a community of support for those who need to know they're not alone in their struggles. Together, we can break the silence around elder abuse and family dysfunction. Together, we can celebrate the courage it takes to choose dignity over convenience. Together, we can prove that every stage of life offers opportunities for growth, discovery, and transformation. Thank you for listening to my story. Thank you for being part of this journey toward truth, healing, and hope. Remember, you are never too old to start living authentically. You are never too old to demand respect. You are never too old to choose yourself. Your worth is not determined by your usefulness to others. Your value is inherent, unchangeable, and deserves to be recognized and celebrated. Don't let anyone convince you it's time to buy a coffin. Instead, let it be time to truly live.